Welcome to Siege, a podcast about Castles and Crusades and other Siege engine games and whatever the hell else we want to talk about. I'm George with my co-host,
Sam,
and we're here to talk to you about some updates and rules for our Castles and Crusades game. First off the bat, we want to talk about charging situations. Rules as written in the Rule of Cool. Samuel, do you have anything you would like to give to us about this first?
So let's just remind the audience what the charging rules are. Rules as written at the moment in the 8th and 9th printing players' handbooks. In those printings, which are the two, the most recent and then also the current printing, in those two printings, the charging rules are on page 218 to 219. They also are found on 221. There's a little more elaboration on that page. But basically, here's what the rules say. They say, normally when you move in combat, you cannot attack if you do more than a half move. So if you do a half move, you can attack. If you do more than a half move, you can't attack. There's one exception to that, and that exception is charging. And so charging has this specific special set of rules that you have to follow if you want to charge and therefore be able to move farther than half your move and still attack. Basically, it goes like this. So there's different types of movement in CNC, right? Regular walking, that's your movement speed. And then jogging is 2 times your movement speed, and running is 4 times your movement speed. So if your normal speed is 20 because you're a dwarf, then jogging would be 40. You could move 40 in one round. And if you were running, you could move 20 times 4, which is 80, right? So that would be your normal movement. But if you want to charge, you have to move at least your regular movement amount. And you can't move more than jogging. Okay, let me back that up. Let me make this real simple. When you're charging, you get a +2 to your damage if you hit. So at the end of your charge, you can attack and you get a +2 to your damage. You have to be careful though, because you take a -4 to your AC during that whole round. Okay. The benefit to charging is that you get to move more than half your movement speed and still attack. That's the whole benefit. That's the benefit you get. That would be the reason to charge. Okay. The problem is that in the PHB, it tells you that you have to move at least your full movement rate. So if you were a dwarf, you have to move at least 20. You could jog, so you could move 40, but you can't run. That's what it says in the PHB, even though it mentions running. And so one of the things that we want to tell you, dear listeners, is that we actually spoke with Stephen Chenault, the CEO of Troller Games, who makes Castles Crusades, and he has confirmed with us, we brought up this issue with him, and he has confirmed with us that charge is being fixed, and that in the next printing of the Player's Handbook, which will be the 10th printing, which is the often mentioned OGL-free version of the Player's Handbook for Castles Crusades, the 10th printing and forward, so any printing 10th and later, will have charge fixed so that you can actually run and charge. So you have to do a minimum of your regular movement rate, and then you can jog or run or anywhere in between there, basically, right? And still get your charge. And so that's the announcement. That's the rule. That's what's happening with it. That's the rules as written. And that will be the rules as written in the PHB 10th printing and later. Currently, it says you can't run, but just so you know, that's changing. He said that it was the intention from the beginning that you should be able to run when you're charging. And so he's not sure where the miscommunication occurred, but that's going to be fixed.
Well, that sounds like good news.
Yeah.
That sounds great, Sam. There's more clarity around that. Mm-hmm. I noticed that there's nothing like 3.5 in here where it has to be in a straight line or things like that. So it's still, is a little bit loose, but it's better.
Well, it says it has to be in a straight line.
Oh, my mistake.
Yep. Yeah. So I didn't mention that, but yes, it does say that. So it says when charging, you're considered to be jogging or running. You must minimally move your full distance of your normal movement rate. It must be in a straight line, and the total distance moved while charging cannot exceed the character's jogging movement rate. Now that last sentence is what's changing. It'll change it to running. Right. So you can't exceed your running movement rate. You have to go minimally your normal movement rate, and it has to be in a straight line. Now, all of those points are, basically what the reason why it says you have to be in a straight line is because it doesn't want people going around the corner.
Correct.
It wants you, because the idea of the chart, it's supposed to be like this cinematic scene, right? You walk into a room, or you're searching a room or something, or you're walking through the forest and you see an encampment of orcs or a group of orcs coming towards you, and maybe they start firing arrows at you and they're 60 feet away. Well, if your movement is 20, it's going to take you 3 turns to get there, or you have to not attack. You have to move at least 1 or 2 turns before you can even get there enough to attack. Because even if you ran, you wouldn't be able to run and attack, right? So you'd have to charge. But the way charging was written, you couldn't run and charge. You had to jog. So it was this really weird sort of situation where you had certain restrictions on how far you had to move versus what you could move. The idea is you're running straight at the foe and you're trying to attack them. The idea is not that they happen to be there and you're going to run around the corner. Because the thing is, you're supposed to be looking at your target. Literally, you're charging in to swing your big bad axe at them, right? You're not charging around a corner, because you don't know what's around the corner if you can't see around the corner.
Yeah, and I think you would slow down quite a bit trying to go around a corner. Wearing armor, a lot of other gear.
Right. Yeah.
I could see a character hopping around the corner, like, like, you know what I mean? That slide. Yeah, like trying to slow down, like, that Bugs Bunny screeching of the tires.
Yeah. So that's rules as written. So what we wanted to talk about tonight are different situations that you run into because of the sort of restrictions on these rules. Even with the change, right? Even with the change, there's still restrictions on these rules and how you adjudicate them, because, well, certain things happen when you're playing the game, right? So these are things that have happened in my game and in George's game, and even games that we've been in together, right? So, and they bring into question or they require an adjudication from the CK, okay? And so we wanted to discuss these, because even though now that the charging rules are quote unquote fixed, right? Even though we've gotten them to where we know exactly what the intent was, that you definitely can run. But now what? Like now though, we still run into some situations. So George, let's talk about those situations.
Yeah. How about the first one? Charging to an opponent and passing a foe. What would you rule would happen for me running past? I have a 10-foot corridor. I'm charging down an orc and I'm running past a kobold.
Okay. So here's the thing. So the other thing that has to come into this that I didn't mention a second ago was that if you're going to charge, because it reduces your armor class for the whole round, you have to declare a charge ahead of time. Okay.
Correct.
You have to say, I'm going to charge, right? Whether or not you have to declare who you're charging at is an open question. It doesn't say you have to declare, I'm charging at that orc that's behind the kobold, right? It doesn't say you have to do that. It just says you have to declare that you're charging. That way, if you roll a low initiative, you still have that low AC for the whole time. So anybody who goes in front of you in the same round, right? Because maybe you rolled a 2 and a couple of enemies rolled 4s or something, they might go before you get your chance to charge. And if they attack you with bow and arrow or something, your AC is still reduced, even though you haven't charged yet, technically speaking, right? So you have to declare, but you don't really have to declare who you're charging at. So taking that into account, let me answer your question. What happens if so you said, I'm charging an orc, I'm in a 10-foot wide corridor, I'm charging an orc who happens to be just beyond a kobold in the hallway. It's a 10-foot hallway, and you're going to theoretically run at the orc, but that means you're running by the kobold, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the problem. The problem is, as soon as you enter a melee situation, you can't just run by, right? So like if you're in melee, so I mentioned movement rules earlier, right? So there's a couple of movement rules that happen and that have specific kind of triggers or actions that have to take place. So if you're in melee, you can't just run away. Well, I take it back. You can just run away. If you're in melee, you can just run away. But if you do that, that's called a hasty disengagement. And a hasty disengagement means that you're leaving the person that you're engaged in melee with and going as far as you want, right? You can go up to your running speed or whatever away from them. Now, in this case, you'll have run a little bit beforehand, so you won't have all that movement left after you pass them or after you go by them or after you disengage with them, but you'll have some of it left. So you're going to run past them. So here's the issue. The other thing about hasty disengagement is hasty disengagement says that you have to declare, and then it happens at the top of the initiative round, right? So a normal, forget the charging for a second. If you were just doing a hasty disengagement, you were engaged with a kobold and you were fighting them and you wanted to run away and go attack a more powerful foe or something. You run away. That's a hasty disengagement. It would happen at the beginning of the round, at the top of the round. You don't even roll initiative. I mean, technically you do, but then it says the action happens first anyway. So you do the hasty disengagement beforehand. But since you're in the middle of a charge in this case, you can't really suddenly turn back time and make that hasty disengagement happen at the beginning of the round. So that's why we need to talk about this, because this is a situation that's not actually addressed in the rules, right? Because technically, if you get within 5 feet of that enemy, the kobold, you are now engaged with them in melee because they could possibly attack you. And if you run by, you're just running away from them. You're basically doing kind of an impromptu hasty disengagement. So you're leaving that area and they get to attack you. That's what would happen if you did a hasty disengagement. You just ran away from them. They'd get to attack you. So I would rule that kobold, as you're running by, gets to attack you. Now, unless that attack kills you, it doesn't stop your movement. So it's not like an attack of opportunity with anything special attached to it. Like, oh, if the kobold hits you because it was an attack of opportunity, you stop, or like nothing like that. And by the way, folks, in C&C, they don't really even call them attacks of opportunity. There really is no such thing as an attack of opportunity in C&C. It's just if you disengage and you're not doing it as a fighting disengagement, whoever you were in melee with can attack you as you leave away, as you move away. So in this case, to get back, George, to your example, so I'm running by the kobold to get to the orc. As I run by, because I'm in a narrow 10-foot hallway, I'm within 5 feet of at some point, I'm technically next to that kobold. That kobold's going to try to swipe at the back of my knees as I run by, right? And then let's pretend like even if they hit me, it does 1 point of damage or whatever, and I keep going, and I get to the orc, and now I make my attack, and my attack is a regular attack. It doesn't get any special bonuses to the attack, but I get a +2 to my damage if I hit. That's how I would rule it. What would you do?
I would rule it the same. From my 3.5 days, I would consider if I should or should not use, have the character lose their dexterity bonus for running. But I would probably be a little
They're already at a -4, right?
Right. So it could even be worse.
So it could be worse. I probably wouldn't do that just because I'm not a huge 3.5 aficionado. So I don't have those rules ingrained in my brain the way that some other people do, right? You know, I know a lot of people loved that edition and played that edition. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying I don't have that. So my brain never goes to that. My brain goes instead to more first and second edition and Beck Me Basic, right?
And the part is being a little bit older now, being a little bit more like, hey, we only get to play once a month. Mm-hmm. I'd probably be a little bit more lenient and not oppose that, put on that rule.
Yeah. I guess the thing is, if I was going to do that, I would probably warn the player, right? I would say, look, when you do this charge now, because maybe things moved in the meantime, right? Maybe that kobold wasn't actually there to begin with, right? And so that player thought their PC was going to get like a straight line to the orc, but then things changed. Maybe they rolled a low initiative and things changed. And now the field of battle has changed, right? The positioning has changed. And so now I might, when that player's turn comes up, I might say, you know what? I know this is a different scene than what it was when you declared your charge. So I'm going to give you the option. I will tell you that when you run by that kobold, you've already got a -4 AC. You also are going to you're going to lose your dexterity bonus to your AC because you are so focused on the orc that you're charging that you're not paying any attention to the kobold. So you lose your dex bonus to AC if you have one, and you're at -4 AC already. So it's really bad for you, but feel free to do it. I'm not going to stop you from doing it. And if you change your mind, I'll let you charge the kobold instead.
Yeah. And I think that's an important part to note too, that, maybe changing your target at that point as well. If the battlefield changed and, that kobold got in the way, or goblin, whatever we want it to be, that first opponent,
right?
It makes it interesting because maybe you do just change your mind. You want to just charge that opponent. So how about scenario 2?
Well, hold up. So I just want to say that's why I mentioned, like, you don't technically have to declare your target, right? So let's say you did, though. Let's say the player did. They said, oh, I'm going to charge that orc, but then everything changed. And now there's a kobold in front of him, right? Because I could see a CK saying, hey, that is naturally where that kobold will go. Or maybe that orc is actually the leader. He's actually like kowtowed those kobolds, right? And he's forcing the kobolds in front of him to rush up to and attack the PCs, right? And so the orc knows, right, that the PCs are going to charge, and so that's why he pushes the kobolds in front of him, right? So That's a valid strategy, but to me, if I would be it would be a dick move for me to say, oh well, the situation changed. You can't charge that orc anymore. Sorry, your turn is wasted. That's not the way to go, right? Yeah. That's not the way to go. But so even if they, I guess what I'm saying, even if they declare their target, right, things can change, and you can be. This is where the flexibility comes in here, because it's not spelled out. Oh, they have to declare A, B, C, and D, and they have to do this, that, and the other, right? It's a little more open than that. Even though these rules seem really constrained, it is actually kind of open depending on what the situation is. So that's all I want to say. So scenario 2. So let me ask you first then for scenario 2. Scenario 2. Let's say you've got you've got PCs, you got a PC on one side and a fighter from a rival evil NPC party on the other. And they see each other at the same time and they go, and they start charging each other.
Well, for me, in that situation, saying that they declared, charging and everything like that, I would go by the initiative dice on who would attack who first. So the one with the highest charging or initiative that's charging would be the one who hits first.
Okay. Does the other one still get the bonus to damage if they didn't get to move before the person charged them?
Well, and this is where it becomes tricky, I believe. I would assume that both of them are moving towards each other. And I think the distance would come into play as well. If the first let's say, for example, they're 40 feet apart, enough for one of them to charge, he makes his charge attack. The other one does not get to make his charge attack.
Even if he declared.
Even if he declared, because he is unable to move the distance.
Okay.
And with that.
Okay. So now you're bringing up another question for me. Okay. So let's say that was that the PC fighter, right, rolled a 9 for their initiative. Okay. And the evil fighter they're charging each other, that guy, the CK is playing that guy. The CK rolled a 2. Okay. So obviously, right, the PC fighter is going to get to go first. But so here's where then now I have to ask, when you play, do you play where the things that happen in a single round is actually simultaneous, and that we roll initiative just to determine which one we resolve first, but they all actually happen at the same time, which is actually what the rule book implies and states at one point and implies at another point.
Right.
But that's kind of like, so that's something that makes a difference, right? So when you run the game, do you run it so that rounds are simultaneous? Like everything in the round is actually technically happening at the same time?
No, actually we base it upon, initiative order is the order in which things are happening and occur. So they would not be simultaneous.
So you don't do simultaneous rounds. Okay. Yeah. See, I do.
Well, in that case, then it gets a little hairier, I think, because, if someone dies, do they get to throw that last spell?
So then I make an exception, right? If two opponents are facing each other and one of them dies, even though they're both attacking each other at the same time, what I say is whoever won initiative and so therefore got to attack and made the hit, their blow killed the other one first.
Okay.
Right. So the other one doesn't get an attack because it died. Right.
Right.
But so the issue is, so that's the only exception I make. Otherwise, everything is basically assumed to be simultaneous. I'm sure, I'm saying that's the only exception. I'm sure there have been cases in the past where I've made an exception. When I do that, I only do it in favor of the PCs. Right. Other than this, it's in favor of initiative. That's why we roll initiative. But otherwise, if there's an exception to something, I always rule in favor of the PCs. But the thing is that this brings up a thing, because if you assume it happens technically simultaneously, that means even though the fighter PC rolled a 9 and the evil PC rolled a 2, technically they're both still moving at the same time. So theoretically they would have been running toward each other, and the only thing that the initiative roll actually determined was who gets to swing first.
Right.
So for me in my game, that's what I would do. I wouldn't just say, oh, whoever won the initiative gets to charge and make the attack, the other one's out of luck, but still suffers a -4 AC. Right. See, that's unfair. Right. So if the other one lost initiative but had declared a charge, suddenly are you going to let them have their full AC because you're not actually letting them complete the charge? See, that's why I say simultaneous. It feels better to me, because then at least I can reasonably say, oh yeah, they're both running, so they're both losing their AC.
Right. And a lot of other things come into play too. Weapons use, things like that. I'm thinking that we're just using swords and shields, basic equipment.
Right. And same size. I purposefully picked two same-sized individuals, two humans, right? Two human fighters. Right. One of them is the PC and one of them is an evil NPC party, right? And they're fighting. And I purposefully did that because remember, when you charge something that's larger than you, it makes a difference, right?
Right.
So I think that's going to be one of the scenarios that we talk about, right? It matters what happens if the other creature's bigger.
And that was more of my raw approach. I would probably have both opponents attack each other, because I do enjoy simultaneous combat from the aspect of the rules on initiative state that, you have to go through all these, if you roll the same number on the D10 and then you look at initiative, and if initiative is the same, then it goes to simultaneous. My house rule is we both roll 7s, it's simultaneous right away. Because I do like to see and envision two opponents running towards each other. And I think this has been done in movies and cartoons and things like that, where both sides hit,
Right. But you said originally that you would let whoever won initiative run the whole way.
Yes, from a raw perspective.
From a raw perspective. Yeah.
Because, you can get into, and I would hand wave this as well. Let's say, they're 40 feet apart. Both of them run 20 feet and hit each other. Right. Technically,
but if their regular movements were 30, then technically they didn't satisfy the charge must be your normal movement rate. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So that would be where they both violated it. Yeah, for sure.
So it's a lot of, and I'm not going to give the answer, just my perception. But I think this is things that the DM needs to consider, or CK needs to consider for their games, right?
Yeah.
We can discuss it, Sam.
I mean, I think so. I enjoy this discussion, but I enjoy this discussion because these are all things that have happened in our games, right? I didn't ever have to adjudicate one of these if it didn't happen. So I think it's odd because the timing is weird, right? I never really cared about it until I had one of these situations, I guess is what I'm saying. So I didn't really think about it beforehand. I knew the rule, but I didn't think about, oh, here's this problem now. How do I adjudicate this situation based on the rule, which doesn't really cover the nitty gritty, right? But that's the situation we're all in, right? I mean, that's just that's what we all do, right? Like that's part of C&C as the style of game it is, right? Same with first edition, second edition D&D, basic D&D, like those games sort of nurture this style of play, right? Where the GM is having to adjudicate these situations that aren't specifically covered by, because think about it. I mean, you would have to write 5 more pages on charge complete with examples and everything. If you wanted to make it rules as written, here's what you do in each of these situations, right? And that doesn't really make any sense. Like, it's better to just have a couple paragraphs and then basically say, okay, now if you run into edge cases where there's some situation where there's some, inconsistency with what's happening, or it doesn't really match the rules as written, you don't just throw your hands up and go, oh, well, I guess nothing happens. You have to actually think about it and adjudicate, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So what's the next scenario?
Scenario 3, hurling a weapon as a charge. For example, running up and throwing a spear. I've had a character want to charge with a spear, but not to drive it into their foe, but to give it a good throw.
Uh-huh.
What do you think about that? That's really out there.
That's not a charge.
It's not?
The rules say when charging,
it has to be a melee attack?
It says when charging, a character precedes a melee attack by jogging or running. It specifically says melee attack. You cannot make a charge-based ranged attack.
Okay.
I mean, that's me. That's what I do.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
If you want to say, can you? Sure. Any GM can rule that, right? So that's a good thing. So if it's a thrown weapon, maybe we split the difference, right? I would say no, you can't do it. But maybe somebody really wants to do it, or somebody's character has a really cool ability with spears or something, who knows? Or they found a really cool spear, or that's just their idea in their head and they think it's really cool and that's what they want to be, but they want to be able to charge with it. Okay, fine. So they have to run at least to their minimum movement rate, and then they throw the spear. Well, they still take the -4 AC, and they're throwing it, so they're doing their regular thrown damage. They might get a +2 to the damage. Okay, fine, that's no big deal. But what happens on a miss? Can they accidentally hit someone else? Right? Or what happens if they get so if it's a thrown weapon, what if they just want to use a bow? What if it's not a thrown weapon? Can they run around a tree and then step out and say, oh, I moved my full movement, so now I'm going to charge and shoot my arrow? Does that work?
No, I wouldn't say so.
But why is that different from the spear?
I think it's different from the spear because I could see like a javelin being thrown. Mm-hmm. The person is running in a straight line. They're taking that throw at the target that they want to.
Right. Okay. Now imagine this. Legolas runs across the open field until he's 30 feet away from the charging line of orcs, and he plants his foot and he pulls back his bow and he fires, and he ran the whole way, and he was charging into battle. But then he shot a bow. How is that different from a spear?
I think with the spear, it's the momentum of the running and throwing.
But he's got to plant his foot just the same to throw the spear, right?
Right, but I'm saying that the javelin has momentum behind it of him throwing it, where the arrow is getting pulled back and shot. Mm-hmm. I think that's the mechanic I was looking at.
But the person's still running.
I think it's very different, though, between a projectile item and a hurled weapon.
I mean, just to be clear, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I totally agree with you 100%. But I'm just saying, I could imagine a player arguing that. Yeah. How is that any different? I'm still running. I'm still putting myself in danger by taking the -4 AC. I'm still running out into the open, and I still have to stop as long as I've moved in a straight line and moved my minimum amount of movement. What difference does it make?
Right. No, And that's where, as a DM, you can say no. And if not, those orcs that they were charging at, just devour them.
But see, this is why I also say no to the thrown weapon, right? Because that's not a melee attack. I don't see the benefit in letting a player do it with a thrown weapon, but not letting them do it with a ranged weapon.
Yeah.
Right. I can understand with a melee attack because the person's putting their full body into running over there and swinging their mace or sword or axe or whatever it is. I agree with you that yes, with a thrown javelin or something, but the fact of the matter is that person still has to stop and plant at least one of their feet to throw that javelin accurately, which means the momentum of their movement is no longer behind the javelin throw. The momentum from the javelin throw comes from their arm, not from them running. Just the same way that you said the momentum of the arrow comes from pulling back the bowstring and letting it propel the arrow forward, not from the person's muscular action, right? Well, the same thing about the javelin. It is from the person's muscular action, but not from their run, from their arm and torso and shoulder movement. Maybe with a shot put, so a cannonball, if they have a cannonball, because in shot putting, your momentum does kind of help, right? Because of the way you throw it. But that's a very specific style where you have it kind of on your shoulder and the crook of your neck and all that. So and this is why, so we're in the weeds now, but again, these are things that a GM might want to think about, right? Because it matters. Now, technically raw only melee attacks. Okay. So if the CK wants to just say, nope, across the board, then go by raw, and you can cite that as your, nope, raw says melee attack. That's it. Full end of story. We're done. No discussion. But I could see a CK that wants to allow a player to have like a javelin throwing, or spear throwing character who has some kind of, fancy fighting style or something. And I get that. Like, that's not to me. So here's the thing, that wouldn't break the game, right? It's just fun to talk about.
Yeah. And, sometimes maybe it's a little bit of the rule of cool, Right.
But remember, though, so here's the thing, though. When you allow a player to let their PC do something that's really cool, they will expect that you let them do that all the time then, because rule of cool. Right. So just be aware.
It is.
Just be aware. Any CK out there, just be aware. If you say yes, and it's something that's kind of typical, like a certain way to attack or something like that, that player is going to expect that their PC gets to do that all the time because you ruled it yes, once.
Very true. Very true. I had that with critical hits. That someone was able to do the ability of like a cleave action where they hit the next opponent.
Right.
And then they were like, well, I killed this guy this time. Why don't I hit the other guy?
Right. Yep. It's like every time.
That's a good point.
Yep. All right. So let's move to the next scenario. Here it is. Okay. What happens if you declared a charge, but in the meantime, the target that you were going to charge at, right? The orc, let's say, that orc, instead of putting the kobold in between you and the orc, right? The kobold stepped behind a table, right? Maybe they had turned a table up. Maybe now instead of in a 10-foot hallway, maybe you're in a larger room, and the orc was standing to the side of the table, and the party runs in, and the player says, oh, my PC's going to charge that orc, right? And then you roll initiative, and the orc rolls a higher initiative than the PC. And in the meantime, before the PC actually gets to run and charge, right, the orc ducks down behind that table, right? So now they're behind an obstacle. Or, even worse, they take off running in the other direction. So now they are actually beyond the charging range. That's actually two different scenarios, right? Because if they're behind a wall or obstacle, now, well, tell me what you would do.
Well, for running behind a wall or another obstacle, now all of a sudden I may or may not be able to go in a straight line. Right. So, for example, if they run down a corridor, I can't technically fulfill the requirements of the charge.
Right. So what do you do?
Well, that character or player needs to find another target.
So you would let them switch targets. Okay.
Right. Or if there are no other targets, they can move up to that position or close to that position. That's another option for them as well.
Do they still take the -4 AC for the whole round?
I would say they would, because they're running.
Yeah. They're still running.
They declared this. Yeah. And if they wouldn't move at all, that gets a little bit tricky then.
Right.
And maybe it's just not a good choice. And I think that, I might be a little bit more lenient on that if they decide not to move, because the idea of charging is that you are moving.
So what if they decide not to, so what if they completely change their action and they go, oh, you know what, instead of doing that, I'm going to do something else. Like I'm going to look in my backpack for a healing potion or something. So they don't even move or do anything. Are they still taking the -4 AC?
I probably would hand wave that and not.
But what if they got hit before their turn? Would you go retcon the fact that they wouldn't have gotten hit if they weren't suffering the -4 AC?
Oh, I typically don't like to retcon.
Right. See, I don't either. Right.
Yeah.
So at that point, it's okay. From this point forward, since you've now changed your action, your AC is back to normal because now you can pay attention. But previously you weren't because you were focused on your target. Right.
Right. And I would even think that with the charge, because you have to declare it before initiative is rolled, that you're kind of already in motion for the start of the round. That's getting a little technical, though, I think.
Right, but see, that's why I asked you simultaneous, right? So for me, I could say, yeah, that's absolutely true because I call simultaneous rounds, but you don't.
Well, I resolve things on initiative. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't be running.
Right, but see, that's exactly why I asked you if you use simultaneous combat rounds, right? Because now what you're saying is you kind of do. If a person's charging, suddenly they're in a simultaneous combat round because they start running as soon as the round begins. It's just that they don't get to their target until they get to their point in the initiative round.
And we can really pull this apart because then really, throughout combat, you would be moving miniatures the whole time.
Right. And that's not like that doesn't, or if you're just doing, see, this is where actually theater of the mind works better, right? Because you could say, well, that you're starting to move, and here's what's happening, right?
I think that could also cause a lot of arguments.
Well, of course, but I'm just saying, so at this point, right? See, now this is, and so just audience, just so you know, this is exactly why George and I wrote this list of situations, right? Because these are discussions that have happened at the table. Because as soon as this is exactly why I say all rounds are simultaneous. Yes, usually if there's a tie or something, or something gets damaged or hurt before their turn initiative, I don't give them another chance, right? And I usually rule in favor of the PCs, but technically speaking, everything's simultaneous, right? So really, it's all happening at the same time. So if you declared an action, you are already beginning that action. Just like if you make your players declare casting, right? Those casters start casting from the moment the round starts, and the spell finishes. If it has a casting time of 1, it finishes on their initiative time, right? So if that wizard rolls a 1 for initiative, they are casting the entire round until it gets to a 1, and then their spell goes off. Then their spell is finished, and so its effect can occur, right? Well, it's the same with a charge, is basically what we're saying. That if you declare a charge, you basically start running as soon as the round begins. Because remember, the round is only like 10 seconds, right? So in that 10 seconds, if you split it up into 1 through 10 based on initiative roll, let's say the person rolled a 10, that would technically mean they ran, 60 feet in 1 second. Right. If you're doing your timing, like if it's all simultaneous, but yet so this is an abstraction, is what I'm saying, is what my point is. But you have to sort of figure out how you're going to conceive of what's happening. Are you going to have it in your brain that it's simultaneous, or is it not? Because sometimes whether it was simultaneous or not, it matters to how you're going to make the choice of how to adjudicate this situation, right? Because what happens, let's take the other one, right? Instead of the orc moving behind a turned over table or a wall or an other obstacle, what if the orc ran the other direction and now they're technically out of range? Now what? Does that PC still have to charge to that point where they would have attacked the orc and then just stops and swings in the air? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, and I think a lot of these are just like, we can discuss them, but every CK has to make up their mind on how they're going to adjudicate these things.
Right. You know? And you can't say that the enemy orc can't run away, right? Because a PC declaring a charge is not the same as a hold spell, right? Like, it's not stopping anybody else from moving, right? So you can't really say, oh, well, I'm not going to move that orc because I know you're going to charge them and I don't want them to go out of range. No, if that orc had an inkling, an idea that their party was being overwhelmed and it should run away and go get reinforcements, it's going to run away and go get reinforcements. It's not going to wait for the charge to finish, right? To turn around. Like, so, that's on the other hand, if the PC rolled a 10 and the orc rolled a 1, basically the way I rule that is, while both theoretically it's simultaneous and so the orc would have already started moving, that just means the PC was able to catch up to them and distract them enough so that they didn't move as fast enough to get far enough away that the PC couldn't reach them, right? Like, you can always build a narrative around what's happening, but it's good to have a solid rules background on what's happening in that narrative. Otherwise, when you have an argument or you have a question or you have a request for adjudication by the players, it will turn into an argument if you don't really have a solid thing in your brain about how this should be working.
Right. They're interesting scenarios. They truly are.
Yeah.
And I think this is with a lot of editions or a lot of different games,
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Well, and a lot of charge rules are written very simply and basically. Like, the CNC charge rules are actually not that. Yeah, it's literally like 3 sentences, right? But because it's only 3 sentences, you end up with all of these different situations, right? Because combat is fast and dynamic. So and because, CNC does not have a prescribed order of events. Like, for example, BECME, basic D&D, right? The Frank Mitzer Red Box version of D&D. It has a prescribed movement procedure, right? So, for example, when you're in combat, okay, everybody declares their actions no matter what it is, and you roll initiative, and it's side initiative. So let's say the PCs win. If the PCs win, they don't just take their turn. Oh, you go, and then you go, and then you go. What happens is anybody who's doing any kind of movement goes. You move your character. And then missile attacks happen. Right? So anybody making a ranged attack or a thrown attack, that's when their missile attacks happen, after all the movement has been done. And then spells happen. So casters who've been casting this whole time, now they send their spell off. And then melee attacks happen. So, even though it's side initiative, there's a distinct order of when everything is happening. Well, CNC doesn't have that. There is no prescribed procedure for how you adjudicate what action. The procedure is roll initiative, and whoever's got the highest number goes before the people with the lower numbers. Like, that's it. It's that simple. So that's why you end up with these situations where, for good reason, right? Again, we don't want to have 5 pages of rules around charging. We just want to have something that's quick and easy and simple to adjudicate. But let's move to the next scenario. What's the next scenario?
The 5th scenario are 2 charge attempts by different characters. For example, the paladin is charging towards the orc, and the orc is charging towards the ranger, all in a straight line, or somewhat of a straight line.
So it might actually be like a triangle, because the paladin's charging the orc, and then the orc is charging down towards the paladin, but in a different angle away from the paladin. So it would be like a triangle almost. If the paladin and the ranger were next to each other, but like 30 feet apart, right? The paladin's charging at the orc. The orc is charging at the paladin. It forms like almost a triangle. So what happens?
So what happens is, if the paladin gets to the orc.
In other words, if the paladin rolls a higher initiative.
Correct. and charges into the orc.
Mm-hmm.
While he does his hit, let's say, and damage, and the orc then is charging towards the elf or the ranger.
Right.
Okay. So in that scenario, we would have the orc possibly being at a -4 AC because he's charging as well.
Right.
And it would be a hasty disengagement. So the paladin may get another strike.
So you wouldn't let you as the CK wouldn't decide, oh, well, the paladin caught the orc, so the orc is now just going to fight the paladin. You would call it that the orc has to keep charging the ranger, even though the paladin caught them.
So it could be that the orc does turn and fight the paladin.
So then it's not a hasty disengagement.
Correct. But if the orc was to charge the elf ranger, then yes, he would.
This also brings up an interesting point too, right? And I didn't really mention it before, but if a creature is going to charge a PC, by all rights, the CK should be declaring that as well. Right?
Agreed.
Because the players have to declare when they're charging. So the CK will know which PCs have a reduced armor class. Well, the creatures, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Right? So
absolutely.
So if the PCs have to do something, then the creature should have to do it too. Which means the CK has to say to the players, okay, because if you're asking any declarations and everybody says, oh, blah, 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 right? Because that's what I do. I say before they roll initiative, I say any declarations. And if nobody declares, then we roll initiative and we go. But if somebody declares something, that would be the time when I myself have to declare, okay, well, those orcs are charging forward. I don't have to necessarily declare the target, right? If I don't make the players declare the target. But if I ask the players to declare their targets, I as a CK should also declare targets of the creatures. Fair is fair.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I've picked up since doing this podcast more so is asking my players before we roll initiative, because I used to love to do the line of, let's roll initiative.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I would truly ask now is, does anyone have any special actions before we roll initiative?
Right.
And that's for the players to make their case or statement of, I'm charging, I'm evading.
Right.
They better not be hastily disengaging.
Well, they could be. They could be, because remember, they have to declare that because they get to do the movement first. That movement happens first.
I'd start taking temperatures to see if any of them were sick.
Well, I mean, that, sure. But I'm just saying, it is still a possibility, right? So in other words, here's the other thing I'm getting at, though, is you said earlier that you would allow, if the situation changed between the declaration and the PC's turn, right? Because you declared, then you roll initiative. If the situation changed in between, you would allow the PC to choose a different action, right? So I would also then allow the creature to select a different action. If the paladin catches them, they don't have to keep running towards the ranger. They can choose to turn around and fight the paladin. Now, they're not going to get the bonus to damage on that paladin that they would have gotten for the charge at the ranger, but they will still get the benefit of not getting the hasty disengage attack and the paladin's at a -4 AC, right? So
I think I need to write out these 27 pages of the new charge rule.
I don't think you do, because the thing is, as it happens at your table, you just think about it and then you just declare your judgment, right? Okay, so let's look at the next situation. Same 3 characters, paladin, ranger, orc. Okay, now in this case, instead of the paladin winning initiative, the orc wins initiative. So the orc charges at the ranger. Okay. And so the orc charges the ranger and runs and tries to attack the ranger. And now it's the paladin's turn. Does the paladin still get to charge even though the orc totally moved and changed position? That's the question.
Yeah.
As long as it's a straight line.
Correct.
And it doesn't go outside the normal charging distance of the paladin.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I would rule too.
And does he get a rear attack?
No, I wouldn't say so. Well, it depends on the exact positioning, right? Depends on the exact positioning.
And let's change the paladin to a fighter because we don't want any alignment issues or discussions. The fighter runs up behind the orc. If they're running in straight lines, I can see it happening. If it's more of a triangle, maybe not.
Well, I mean, so if it's more of a triangle, it would have been that the paladin ran at the orc, making one side of the triangle, but instead the orc went first and ran towards the paladin, which made theoretically the other side of the triangle.
Yeah.
But now the base of the triangle is the paladin running after the orc, who's now standing next to the ranger or in front of the ranger, right? And so will they get a back attack, a rear attack? Well, so here's the thing. A rear attack says if you're attacking from directly behind the creature, right, you get a +2 bonus to hit. So that's not the same as the rogue's sneak attack or back attack, and it's not the same as the assassin's back attack, just so everybody knows. But I don't particularly look, if the creature is aware of you, you cannot just get suddenly a bonus to the rear attack. You just don't. That's my personal ruling, but any reasonable CKs could differ on that. It says you could do it, so theoretically that paladin now could definitely get directly behind the orc who is attacking the ranger, right? And get a +2 bonus to the attack roll as well. I personally would say no, because that orc is aware of where the paladin is.
Correct.
And the orc, because even though the orc is taking a -4 to their AC because they're kind of on a single-minded mission, they're still able to defend themselves. That's why they don't lose their dexterity bonus to the AC, right? That's why it's not a dex bonus loss, because they're still paying attention. So I would say they know you're coming up behind them. They can slightly shift, to not let you get a full-on back attack. So that's how I would rule it. I would say no. But, like I said, anybody's free to do something different.
Yeah. Honestly, Samuel, while I know the rules exist for flanking and rear attacks, I really try to stay away from them. It just creates a different level of play where people are moving around the grid or, stepping into a different location just for that extra.
Right. Well, so flanking in Castles Crusades is not like flanking in D&D. Flanking in D&D is two opponents on opposite sides of, or two PCs, for example, on opposite sides of a creature. So whether it's one's behind and one's in front, or they're off to the same directional side, so you can make a line through the creature. Like that's flanking in D&D. That's not flanking in Castles Crusades. In Castles Crusades, a flank attack is a true flank attack. You have to truly be on the flank of the creature, the left rear side or the right rear side of the defender. And then, you're getting basically a +1 to your hit. That's it. There doesn't even have to be, another ally of yours on the other side.
Right.
A flank attack is a true flank attack. And the idea is you're kind of just out of their peripheral vision, so they can't really see you. And so you get a slight bonus to attack. That's the +1. Rear attack, they definitely can't see you because you're directly behind them. That's why it's a +2. Okay. That's not a flank. That's just a rear attack. Personally, I would not allow either one of those in combination with a charge. I don't want my players to learn that they can do 5 different combat maneuvers and stack a bunch of bonuses. That is not what I want from my CNC. For my CNC, I want quick and simple. I know it doesn't sound like that because we're sitting here adjudicating these, obscure edge case, situations, but that's because these are fun situations and we like talking about them. But I'm just saying, at most, in my game, at most, a player can have their PC attempt 1 combat maneuver per combat round. That's it. So you can't charge and do a rear attack. You can't receive a charge and do, a fighting disengagement, or, evade and, something, you know what I'm saying? Like you can't do a shield blow and a shield wall. You can't do it. They're 2 different functions, 2 different actions. You can't do it. So you can't attempt one and the other. Or you can't do a charge, and then because the situation changed, you're going to dodge at the end of the charge. Nope, can't do that. If you're charging, you're charging. That's the combat action. That's it.
I think that's pretty fair too. So I'll retcon my charge from the rear, because at a certain point, my fear is always dropping back into 3.5.
Right.
It's definitely an addiction at times where, I want to dive in and then I realize I don't want to go back to that world.
Right. So I know what playing a game like that is like. It's just not my style. I don't prefer it. So let's go to the next scenario number 6. Okay. The PC, the fighter or paladin, if you prefer, is charging a large ogre.
Okay. So it's a large ogre. So they get to hit first, swing first. If they make their attack, they're going to hit that character charging them. If they hit, the charge is negated.
And why do they get to attack?
Because they're huge. They're large.
But where is that in the rules, George?
That's on page 218, right above the paragraph above melee combat.
It doesn't say that about size. That's not where it is. It's not there. You know where it's at? It's in the initiative rules.
The penalty also applies if the defender attacks first due to size or weapon length or
right. But
ranged attack.
But it does, due to size, what is that? What I was asking is, where is the rule about size? What I was saying was, okay, so you're right. The larger creature gets to attack, but why? The charge rule doesn't actually say why. It just says, oh, if it gets to attack first due to size. What does that even mean? Well,
it would be under initiative. Yes.
So the initiative rule is when a large creature is fighting a medium or smaller sized creature, then the creature that is larger gets to attack first. That's the rule. That's the initiative rule. No matter what the initiative roll was, the first time that those two creatures meet in melee, the larger one gets the first attack chance. So what that means is, think about what this says. It says, when charging, the attacker suffers a -4 penalty to armor class for the combat round. The penalty applies even if the charge attack is not successful. It also applies if the defender attacks first, right? So why would a defender attack first? And there's only 2 cases where a defender would attack first, and one of them is size. And that's because in the initiative rules, it says the first moment that the 2 combatants are in melee together, the first point they are engaged, the creature with either longer reach or larger size gets to attack first, even if the other creature won the initiative roll. So that means if you charge that big creature, it's possible that as you run up, they're going to punch you in the head.
Right.
And you're still at a -4 AC.
Correct.
But does that mean that you don't get to attack them?
If you get struck, your charge is negated.
Right. So your charge is negated, but do you get to attack still?
You're still allowed your attack.
Right. But no extra damage.
Right.
So that's what the charge being negated means. It doesn't negate any of your movement, because, I mean, obviously you moved to the creature. You made it there so it could hit you, right? And you still get to attack. You just don't get the bonus to the damage. And you're getting, basically, they get an attack on you first, and you're at a really negative AC, but they were maybe going to get that anyway. It's just that the order of who got to attack first changed, and you don't get your damage bonus.
Right.
So here's the thing, is that what we're talking about applies to both of these last 2 scenarios. It applies to a creature charging a larger creature. So if you are a small or medium-sized creature and you charge a large or larger creature, they always get to attack first the first time you're engaged. That's only in the first time you're engaged, which that will be on the charge, right? Because you're charging because you're not engaged with them yet. The same thing is true if you charge a creature that's holding a reach weapon, right? Like a polearm, like a halberd. So if that creature that you're charging is using a polearm. And what's more, if they set their polearm against a charge, right? You're so actually receiving a charge, like setting your polearm against a charge, right? That means you place the butt of your spear or halberd or whatever it is in the ground, right? And you're propping it, and you're sort of supporting it, and you've got like the right angle and all that stuff. That means that the attack roll is with that item, and you do double damage if you hit. So if the paladin decides to charge the ogre's number one larger than they are, so the ogre's going to get an attack, and they could actually set a polearm against the paladin's charge, and that means that the attack that they're doing does double damage, and you're at a -4 AC, so it's likely to hit, maybe.
Very quite possibly.
Yeah, theoretically. if you're charging a creature and you have a -4 AC, like, you need to be careful if they are larger or if they have a polearm, right, or a reach weapon of any sort, because Yeah. And even so, now we don't even have, it doesn't have to be larger and with a polearm. It could just be with a polearm. So it could be a soldier on the other side, a human soldier who has a spear or a halberd or some other type of polearm. I don't know why I keep focusing on those two, but you get the idea. Any polearm that is any reach weapon that is at least 10 feet long. That's what a polearm is. Okay. If they have a polearm and they set it against your charge, they are attacking you first, even though you charged. And you are at a -4 AC on their attack. Doesn't matter what size they are.
Yeah. And if they're a large creature, they're going to get hit, which is going back to our charge episode. Never charge the troll.
Right. Exactly. Never charge the troll. So the reason that we wanted to talk about this evening, number one, is to give you the update about the change in charge rules going forward, but also, and that's an official update. We got it right from the Grandmaster Troll's mouth, okay? Mr. Troll Steve himself, okay? That's a real official change. Now, here's the thing. Charging, for some reason, in some groups, it never comes up at all. I mean, I've had groups that no one ever charges, right? Or they think they're going to charge. They go, oh, I'm going to charge, but they didn't declare before initiative, so I don't let them do it, right? And then they forget. And so they just never charge. They just move their half movement and they attack or whatever, right? Or I've also had groups where every single combat, there's 2 PCs charging, every single one, right? It just happens that they do. Yeah. Like it's a thing, right? Some players really like it. They like doing it. They think it's really cinematic. It feels really fun. They do it. And so it's a part of the game, and you end up with all these different kinds of scenarios, right? And in some groups, it's just never going to come up. It just hardly ever comes up, And I also know CKs who, if their player didn't declare and says in the middle of combat, oh, I want to charge over to that guy, they just let them do it. It's not a big deal, right? It's not a big deal. So, just as with anything with CNC, flavor to taste, use the rules as written to taste, make your decisions to taste, match your table, right? What we really mean by rule of cool is do the thing that's the most fun for your players and your table. But what that also means is most fun for you too, right? It's not just the players who are having fun. It's supposed to be the CK as well. So if there's a rule that you adjudicate it, but you just don't like the way that it's happening or something, or it worked right in that situation, but now there's been 3 more and the players want to keep doing that thing. And it feels like it's like a cheat. Like it just feels cheap. It's cheapened that cool thing they did. Then just tell them, okay, I'm not going to allow you to do that anymore. Do you have any last words, George?
Well, you kind of took a lot of it away from me on that.
Sorry.
Again, yeah, with the rule of cool, totally be careful using it. It can run away on you. I like to say rule in favor of the players most of the time as well. I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander as well. Mm-hmm. And my players definitely feel that at times. Having a bunch of orcs charging at you with, clubs even. Mm-hmm. It really wakes up the party when you use some of these maneuvers like charging.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think this might be the end of the episode then. Where can people find you on the internet, George?
They can find me on Discord at UltraMagnus. George, especially on the Troll Lord Games forum.
Awesome. You can find me there too as DMSamuel. You can find me on all the socials as DMSamuel and on rpgmusings.com.
Keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars.